Hello, my name is Greg Massi, and this is episode number 23 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. So how's everybody doing? I hope you're all doing well. You can find us on the web at www.colorofair.com. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/colorofairpodcast. You can find us on Twitter at The Color of Air. You can subscribe, rate, and review to our podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher. And I would recommend or ask nicely that you please go to iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe, rate, and review, because the more subscriptions, the more rates, the more reviews we get, the more we kind of grow. And if it sounds like I harp on that every week, it's because I kind of I have to. There's a lot of podcasts that do that, I notice. They spend a good chunk of the first part of the podcast either, doing ads for some product or explaining why these things are important. And they are. So, and this is the time to do it because, if you want, I'm guessing you can fast forward through this if you're bored by people talking about why you should support their podcast or how you can support their podcast. But the fact that you're listening is the number one thing for me. And for those of you who have been with us for a while, thank you. For those of you who are new to this podcast, thank you. Like I said, it's a podcast about the musical journey. Each week we talk with musicians or people involved with the music industry. Hopefully we'll branch out to other areas too. But, we just talk about, I try to have, cool, laid back conversations with people and just see, see where they go, see what happens. So before I get to this week's episode, the other plug is www.retconrecordings.com, which is where you can find any and all of my musical output that's up for sale. And again, I encourage you to do that because every single thing you purchase helps support the podcast and helps support me in my musical journey, so to speak. And it's again, to go off on a little bit of a tangent, every little bit helps. And this is a pretty big year for us. We've got a Ballasted album that is, nearing completion, slowly but surely. We've got the podcast, which I'm, always looking to expand in some interesting way. And then I'll tell you about another thing I've got in the works soon too. So, but these projects, they're not exactly cheap. They cost money. And so every little bit you do to help support us would be great. So, if you can't buy anything, I totally understand that, tough times economically. But, tell a friend, like I said, subscribe, rate, and review. Spread the word around. Word of mouth is probably the best thing you can do because that's free and it helps support us in a big, big, big way. So, yeah. So the other project, I guess I'll let it go right now and speak about it. I mentioned on the last podcast that I had attempted the RPM challenge and did not complete it, which was the challenge is to write and record an album in the month of February. And I did a lot of writing though, and the ideas that I came up with are really strong. And because my main focus with the Ballasted album right now are lyrics and vocals, I definitely wanted to. I'm always coming up with chord progressions and song ideas, and keeping track of them. So in addition to what I came up with in February, I've got other things that have been lying around for a few months, a couple of years, things that I'd like to kind of maybe put together with the stuff I came up with in February into this new project. it's not Baliset. It's a, I specifically wanted to do something that was very different tonally than Baliset is. And so I didn't want to write lyrics because I'm not really in my mind, I'm not the greatest lyricist in the world, and lyrics are the hardest part of the process for me. I think lyrics are the whole reason why I usually, delay and put off finishing things, because it's the hardest part for me. And, I was spoiled being in bands with really amazing lyricists before. So I decided to do the natural thing, and that was to ask one of those lyricists, Jason Byron, former podcast guest, for help. And so he sent me a few poems that he had lying around, and some of them we put music to so far. Some of them haven't had music added to them yet. We're structuring them, kind of turning them into, melodic lines. And, the part of the album too was, I imagined it having instrumental things too. And so I also involved Byron with coming up with titles for those different things. So there's no project name yet. There's no release date. No real pertinent information I can tell you other than me and Byron are doing this. And, he's also working on lyrics for some KO.dot stuff, I believe. We're all pretty busy. So, the project will be done when it's done. Obviously my main focus right now is this Baliset album because it's been in the works for so long. But I would like to follow up the Baliset album pretty shortly thereafter with this new project, just to kind of get some more stuff out there, maybe even generate some revenue. Ooh, it's a scary word. So it's only scary because I never encounter it. All right, so this week's guest, I kind of previewed it a little bit on the colorful topic of the week, which you can find. And you can contribute to. So I'd say go back, listen to the different discussion topics I've put out, and feel free to email us at colorofairpodcast@gmail.com to contribute to the discussion. This week's topic was the notion of received ideas in music. So this was kind of a last-minute interview idea. It just kind of popped to me. And it's a guy named Jeff Wagner, who I've known kind of peripherally throughout the years. Jeff is somebody who's, he could be a musician. I don't know. I don't think I actually asked him that. I know he doesn't have a band as far as I'm aware, but he is a huge music fan who has been involved with the music industry for a long, long time now. Hopefully that doesn't make you feel old, Jeff. His thing was he was an editor at Metal Maniacs magazine. And in the late 90s, Metal Maniacs was kind of a real big deal for us. Or I don't know for us, but for me, definitely. There were these kind of two magazines that, were pretty accessible almost anywhere in the country. One was Metal Edge, which was kind of like more the popular music of the time. And then there was Metal Maniacs, which kind of focused on some of the more underground and extreme stuff. But because they were kind of under the same umbrella, there just was a wide availability for Metal Maniacs. And I thought it was a really cool magazine. And so Jeff was an editor there. And I don't know how it happened, but, he was one of the people who was instrumental in getting Maudlin of the Well our first exposure in Metal Maniacs. The first thing was we got an album review for My Fruit Psychobells, our first album. And, I still have a copy of it somewhere. I told Jeff I found a thing my mom kept for me of all these different magazines I was in. And, and it's funny he mentioned when I brought it up, as you'll hear, he mentioned something about how one of the guitar solos in the last song, "Light of River Systems," really kind of, he thought was really cool, and apparently the reviewer thought it was cool too, because it was the first time we had gotten into a magazine, but it was also the first time someone had really named me. And said, "Oh, and then this song features this beautiful," well, I forget the words he used, but they were good. But this beautiful solo by Greg Massi, and that just it meant the world to me at the time. Just being like a 22 year old kid, dork, basically metal dork, and it meant the world to me. And so I owe Jeff a huge debt of gratitude for that. And then it continued. I mean, he then went to work for Century Media, I believe in their distro department, or their web, the Omega, the CD store. And so he was very helpful in helping to get the Ballad album, the first Ballad CD, in the store. I don't know if it's still available there anymore. It may not be. I only gave him a few copies, but he's been a huge fan of music for many years, and he's done a lot of cool things. And the big thing about it, what really prompted me to want to talk to him, is that he had just recently published a book. He published a book called "The Life and Music of Peter Steele." Actually, the full title is "Soul on Fire: The Life and Music of Peter Steele." And as someone who was never a huge Type O Negative fan, I didn't even think to get the book. I just kind of was happy that somebody I knew who, had worked really hard on a project and got it out. So it made sense to say, oh, well, why don't I have Jeff on the podcast? And so, I set it up with him, and then had about a week before the podcast took place, realized I probably should read the book. So I picked up Soul on Fire, tore through it in my spare time, and loved everything about it. It just was, we talk about it more, so I don't want to bore you now, but it's a really excellent book. And it really, I think it really humanizes Peter Steele, and it made me appreciate him as a musician more. I always thought he was pretty cool, but I just never really listened to their music. But it made me rediscover Type O Negative's music, and so I think a lot of people are having that same reaction. There's also some negative reaction, which we talk about in the podcast a little bit. But it was amazing. And then the other book Jeff wrote, his first book was called Mean Deviation, and it was it's basically like kind of a history of progressive metal from the 60s through today. And so I actually hadn't read that at the time I did the interview, but I've since picked it up, and I've been reading it this week, and phenomenal. Of course, because I'm a wise ass music nerd, I've been teasing Jeff over email about his questionable opinions regarding certain albums, Rush Hemispheres, but it's all in good fun, Jeff. The conversation with him was great. We had a lot of fun. We went longer than I expected. I wasn't sure, but we could probably fill another 3 hours of podcast just geeking out about different music stuff. He's of the same ilk as me, the obsessive music fan, and I'm really happy with the way this interview came out. It was so awesome. So I'm so excited to share it with you. So yeah, now because I don't have any music to play, I decided I'll do a little brief self-promotion before the interview kicks in. So as I mentioned, we have this album coming out, this project in the works, I should rather say. And so I actually put out the first a song, an instrumental that I wrote for this project in February, and it's called Journey Through Snow-Covered Pines. And Byron came up with the title for me. And it's just an instrumental I did with Tibetan singing bowls bowl and my 12-string acoustic guitar. So I'm going to play that for you. And after that, Jeff Wagner.
Hello,
Hey Jeff,
Greg.
how you doing, man?
I'm doing quite well. Good to meet you and hear your voice.
I know it's strange. I don't think I've ever met you or talked with you. And
I don't think so. I don't think so. Of course, I knew about you in the Maudlin days, so that was a name on the on the lineup list.
Yes, yeah, yep.
That's great stuff.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because before we get into questions and all the other stuff you've been into, I was going to share a little anecdote with you. So my mother passed away a few years ago,
Mm.
and so I was home last year, and my dad was like, "Oh, there's some stuff here with your name on it. Can you help get rid of it or whatever?" And I found this folder, and it was a folder with my name on it that my mom wrote. And when I opened it up, it was, original copies of all the Maudlin and Well CDs that I had given her. She never opened and listened to.
Not
And and it was all the Metal Maniacs that had ran the Maudlin stuff.
right.
And you were pretty much the one responsible for that, so thank you.
Oh yeah, no, you're very welcome. In fact, I remember when I first got Psycho Bells, I guess we'll call it. I gave that to Craig Zoller, and for some reason he, not knowing if he'd like it at all, and he was at that point a very good friend and also one of my most sort of valued writers. I just really liked how he approached everything, and I thought, well, we'll see what he thinks of this, because there's a solo at the I think it's the last song on that album that reminds me of Buck Dharma on BOC. It's very fluid and of course very melodic, and just reminded me of that. And I'm a big BOC fan, and so is Craig. I'm like, well, maybe he'll like this. So so I sent it to him, and he loved it. And I think he did something on that album in Maniacs. But I was I was always the one sort of like either, if not writing about it, certainly try to turn other writers onto it, or all that stuff. So.
Well, it was very helpful, and at that time in my life, I mean, that was like the ultimate dream, like the ultimate kind of measure of success. It was,
Sure,
hey,
sure.
I've got a full color spread in Metal Maniacs.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm so glad the magazine itself is sort of, well, we can talk about this later if you want, but
Mm.
it's just, I'm so glad it's, still kind of looked upon with a lot of good feelings and good remembrances of
Yeah.
that run. And, the fact that they were, a magazine pushing, I don't know, names like Rotting Christ on newsstands in small town Iowa somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a great
Well,
thing.
well, was it because there was two of them? There was Metal Edge and Metal Maniacs, right? Was Metal Maniacs as kind of a subsidiary of that?
Not a subsidiary. They just sort of happened to kind of develop it around the same time under the same publishing company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but Metal Edge was obviously always looking, and I think Metal Edge predated Maniacs, but Maniacs wasn't necessarily an outgrowth of that. It was more just like, well, we need a place to put all this more extreme stuff that's really happening, with the success of like Megadeth and Metallica and Slayer and all that. And of course, I don't have to detail that sort of late 80s,
Yeah.
early 80s world for you, but what was happening. It was like, well, we can't really do that in Metal Edge. Let's make a different magazine. And that was really more where Catherine Ludwig and Rest Her Soul and Mike G came in and kind of started that whole thing up. So.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, yeah, that was a good time. And so now I still have pristine copies of those magazines to
Cool.
to look back on.
Cool, cool.
So yeah, so what is you've been around a bunch of different kind of things in the music biz for the last like however many years. Where did you get started doing what you do?
Yeah, it's been 20 plus years, so thanks for making me feel really old.
Oh no, I didn't give it. You gave the number. I didn't give the number.
I'm fine. Yeah, it's 20 plus, 25, I suppose, when you count. I guess the first extra music or extra fan kind of thing I did, sort of just beyond being, the normal fan who buys records and listens to music and reads about it. The first thing I really did outside of that scope was probably my radio show at University of Iowa in like 80, 88, 89.
Hmm.
The metal specialty show opened up there, college radio, pretty big university, and it was a nice, 9 to 12 slot on Saturday nights. So it was great. And that's really the first thing I did. And that was really revealing, because I thought, what a great thing to, I wasn't getting paid for it. It was, volunteer student stuff, but to just be able to control what any given person listens to if they tune in, and to kind of push my agenda, which is just always, great metal, really. I mean, and I had fun with it, and it was a really successful show. I think it was like the second most listened to show in that whole, station, and they had pretty excellent bandwidth for a college radio station. So that's where I really got started. I think in tandem with that, I began kind of making myself available completely naively to fanzines and getting in contact with some fanzines I was reading and saying, hey, I'll do some reviews for you, having nothing really interesting to contribute, just wanting to write. And so I started doing that as well. I think Anti-Poser was a Canadian fanzine that I wrote for a little bit, and Sheet Metal from Minneapolis, which was more of a glorified fanzine and kind of really more of a real magazine. So those are some early forays into that world.
Well, yeah, well, that's a long since. I think like it might be coming back a little bit. The whole fanzine mentality. We have a fanzine that just started up in Massachusetts, so
yeah, I think there is some interest. I think some credit can be given to the black metal scene, because I think those the people that follow that stuff closely. I don't know if you remember Oaken Throne.
Mm-hmm.
John Mincemoyer did that. That came out in the middle of a total. There was nothing out there for print fanzines, at least not new ones.
Yeah.
All the old ones were dying off, and then he started that. And I think that deserves some credit, because there were other black metal or super extreme metal kind of fanzines that came out around that time and kind of kept that going and kept the interest in actual paper alive. And I think a lot of people are realizing the value of the physical article, whether it's fanzine, magazine, or vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
People like the tactile element. They like the artwork element. You're not going to get that in downloads. You're just not. And you can look at it on a screen, but goddamn, we look at screens all the damn time.
Yeah.
Let's be able to read something on the toilet again. If it falls in it,
Well, I agree with you, and I agree with you while making the concession that I did purchase my copy of Soul on Fire on Kindle.
Well, thank you for your purchase, Greg. I appreciate it. No, but here, I understand the times we're living in, and I don't mean to seem like a total old school curmudgeon or anything, because I'm not. And I recognize the value and the need for ebooks like Soul on Fire, and Mean Deviation, I think, was the first ebook that Bazillion Points did, simply because we got enough requests for it. It's by far not their best selling book, but I just mean that that audience, there was enough people that liked the ebook, and you gotta give people whatever they're requesting if it makes sense to do so. And I'm not against electronic versions of anything, but I just personally, I don't know, I don't feel like I really own or can truly get into an album unless I have the real thing, and that's definitely old school. I know that, but I like it. I just like it. I like having a huge music library. It's not a hassle for me. It's not a hassle for me to carry a paperback book through an airport. I've heard people say, "Oh, well, then I don't have to carry my book." I'm like, "What is it? What book are you carrying? Like, the New York City phone book? I mean, that would be a hassle." So anyway, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I am old school. I do like the physical stuff, but I also recognize the times we're living in and the need for that stuff. So.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm actually fairly old school in my I mean, for me, it was always about tapes growing up, because it took a while before we had the money to afford CDs.
Sure.
and making the mixtapes, and and once we got CDs, and I remember when I was in high school, it's like vinyl was still kind of dying out at that point. But I remember just going and picking up Iron Maiden albums from the used rack, and just being like, there's something to be said for the big artwork, and the that's something that I thought got lost a little bit, even with CDs. I was, I'm like, well, this is kind of small.
Oh, definitely. I really lamented that as a vinyl fan, and kind of fan of the aesthetics of whatever bands were important to me, and then seeing that sort of the extension that artwork is of the music. Basically, I hated seeing that shrunk down. However, I came to really like CDs a lot after, like, I think I got my first CD player in like '91, which is a little later than most people that I knew, because I was just holding on. But as soon as you started getting bonus tracks on CDs and very little packaging in the vinyl versus the CD, I was like, well, I guess I'm kind of forced to buy CDs, and then I got into CDs. It's a great format. I still love CDs. I still love CD and vinyl. There's a lot of records that I treasure that I have on both formats.
Yeah.
Because I love both formats that much, and they offer something a little bit different too, I think. And then all of that stuff I've dumped into iTunes. So
Yeah.
I love the portability of my iPod too.
Yeah, I have my entire music collection in one little thing.
It's great. I mean, no, that's great. To me, the digital thing is more supplementary
Right.
to the physical music, but everybody does it in a different way. And really, at the end of the day, all that really matters is, if people are. I hope that people are getting into music with the same enthusiasm, no matter which way they buy it.
Well, one thing, kind of funny. One thing you're making me think of is well, I like the sound quality of CDs, obviously, but one thing that always kind of got to me after a while was because of the increased time limit you could put on the CD.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there were some bands who just kind of were putting a lot of crap on their albums to pad it up to 70 minutes. And, I mean, the thing about the vinyl was, people can say what they want about, whether they like the sound quality of it or not, but the limit of, 40, 45 minutes, it forced you to kind of just make hard choices and really make a specific album.
Absolutely, dude. Yeah, that's a great point. I love talking about that because, I'm really glad that, say, Suffocation and Deicide didn't decide to make 78-minute albums when they could have, because I think they probably understood that this stuff has more impact at 35 minutes,
Yeah.
For people who listen to albums. And I'm definitely an album listener, and I appreciate that. I think there are very few bands that have been able to make 79-minute albums that are entirely listenable. I would say 3 bands come to mind: Tool, Mars Volta, and Typo Negative. They always had these very lengthy albums, but it sort of fit what they were doing. So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, I always hated that too. You just tell the albums that were padded out because they could. Oh,
yeah.
we're gonna make a 16-song album because we can. Well, that's not.
Yeah.
It's not speaking to the art of the album, sort of the impact you want to have, is it?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at an album and it's got more than 10 tracks on it, I'm a little skeptical at best. I got to be honest.
Well,
7 to 8 tracks is my kind of go-to.
Well, that's more the prog mentality.
Yeah.
If it's got more than 7 tracks, it's a sellout, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
There was I don't know, it went around like 10 years ago when the iPod first started getting big, and there was kind of this online sort of joke thing that the new iPod for the new prog rock iPod holds up to 60 songs.
Yeah.
Figuring that all these songs are an hour and a half long.
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, look, well, because when I was in college, I also had a radio show. Mine wasn't very successful. Mostly because I think we broadcast a good 100 feet, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, but I remember I had the graveyard slot, 12 to 2, 12 to 3,
yeah,
and I knew nobody was listening, so I honestly would just put on Hemispheres by Rush and in its entirety and be like, all right, I'm gonna go have a cigarette for a little while. Here
right,
you go.
Right. Yeah, there was always those bathroom break songs that I do as well. So I hear that.
Yeah. So I mean, but then again, maybe it didn't broadcast right, but that was like my first foray into what I do now with the podcast, because I got the chance to interview people, and they didn't really understand that they were not being heard by anybody. But they were very friendly to me, and so that's all that matters.
Sure. You sold the perception that they were being listened to. So.
Oh yeah. This is the #1 station in Rhode Island, and blah blah blah.
Right.
But so all right. So well, before we get to the Peter Steele book, So I apologize. I still have yet to read Mean Deviation, although I am going to be getting it on Kindle at some point. And so, what kind of got you into writing? What made you decide to start writing books?
Sure. First of all, I'd send you a copy of the book if I had one. I only have my own copy, so I just
That's
want to
okay. No, that's it's
have
fine.
one.
I don't mind buying it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you buying it in advance. So, yeah, what got me into writing books? I guess it was just an extension of writing, articles, reviews and stuff for magazines, and obviously all the writing I did with Maniacs and just numerous freelance stuff I'd done throughout the years. At some point I was like, that's not enough. I want to do something that's a little more long form, and do a book. So it had to be the right book, and a book on progressive metal hadn't been written yet, and it's certainly a very nerdy niche kind of area, which is perfect for me. So I thought, yeah, great. And it's a couple years before I actually sat down to write it. I would visit New York. This is after I'd left and was living in Virginia, but I'd go up to New York and visit once a year, and I'd often see Ian Christie. And he was even then, I think before Bazillion Points was an entity, but I think he was kind of always had in the back of his mind that this is what he wanted to do. But he would always kind of joke with me about, God damn, you got to put all that useless knowledge in your head to good use and make a book out of it, because he knew I was always kind of, drifting toward the progressive stuff, whether it was progressive rock or progressive metal. So, he had kind of like planted the seed in my head, I guess. So when he started Bazillion Points and announced that he was starting it, and I think he started with a new version of Swedish death metal, and I think the next one he did was maybe the Nightwish book. But he was, it was humble beginnings, but it was a very strong start. And I remember emailing him in response to this press release he put out saying, well, I know an author who wants to do his prog metal book if you're interested at all, haha. And he got right back to me. He's like, let's do it. And literally we were just underway, and it just started happening. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm writing a book. How do you do that? But I'd read enough, I'm a pretty avid reader as well, music and otherwise. And so I was like, yeah, I can do this. And that's how it started.
And so the process of getting Mean Deviation together, which, as an aside, everybody should go pick up, because you're right. I mean, the progressive side of the metal, is kind of poorly represented in, biographies and such. But what did you just kind of go off of? I mean, what did you do for research to it? Did you just go back and listen to all the old records? Did you try to find band members to talk to?
Sure, and that wasn't all that difficult for two reasons. One, a lot of the music that's in that book I'm already totally familiar with on a listener level.
Mm-hmm.
So there didn't, there was some research, of course, but I would say, honestly, a lot of that was already in my head, just waiting to kind of come out.
Oh, okay. So you
talked about and strung together. So it was an area I was already very comfortable in, But and as far as talking to people, I had already gained sort of enough contacts throughout the years to make that pretty easily. And when I didn't have a contact, it was easy to get. So I was just fortunate that I wasn't starting as a total rookie. I think it would have been a lot more daunting had I started as a rookie, both as a listener and as a writer and researcher.
Yeah.
But I was coming off. I had certain advantages there. So it was actually more kind of an extension of what I love to do anyway, which is listen to music first, and second, share it with other people.
Yeah, well, I think from what again, I apologize for not having it all read in advance to discuss it, but from what I've been told, I mean, the whole point of the book is, yeah, you're exposing a lot of bands to people that were not, didn't really have like a huge promotional thing, you know what I mean? Like
sure, you're never going to see another book with like 3 pages on Panthymonium or
right.
2 pages on Blind Illusion or whatever. This is the only book that exists for that. Disharmonic Orchestra, same way.
Yeah.
But my definition of progressive is a little bit different. It always has been, but I stand by it, and I was able to kind of steer that agenda into the book. By agenda, I don't mean anything kind of sinister. I just mean that look, here's my musical opinion. I take this stuff very seriously, and what do you think? What do you all think of this? And I like discussion as well. I don't think that my word is law at all. It's music, it's objective. But my vision of what progressive meant as applied to metal is a little bit different, because I think a lot of people thought this book was going to be a lot of talk about Dream Theater and all the bands that sound like Dream Theater.
Right.
So there is a lot of Dream Theater and Mean Deviation, but there's also a discussion about, I think the entire chapter, I think it's chapter 11, talks about, well, if a band sounds like a progressive band or emulates a progressive band, is that progressive? Like, that was a major question in the book that I tried to answer and tried to kind of hammer out. And my answer to that is no. I think progressive should be something fresh and original to some degree, just by the nature of its definition. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I agree completely.
And Maudlin of the Well, for instance, is a great example of a band that was truly progressive when they came out. It wasn't like, oh, they sound just like Voivod, or oh, they sound just like Dream Theater. They really, there was a unique path being forged there, and I think that's what I'm looking for when I think about progressive. So,
well, thank you.
and I still like when people, 4.5 years later now. I just heard from a guy in Denmark a few weeks ago who said, "Yeah, I love Mean Deviation, and I love how you changed the definition of what progressive means." And I thought, well, I don't know if I changed it on a global scale for everybody, but I certainly, have heard that from a number of people, and that's pretty satisfying. And it's also really satisfying to just write a book like that and have people tell me, "Oh, I've got a list of like these 17 albums I'm going to buy now." I mean, that's what it's all about. It really is, and it just, I spend a shitload of time in my music room focusing only on music because it's the most important thing in the world to me. In terms of, it's humankind's greatest and most beautiful invention. And like, I do take the listening seriously. So if others do, and I've turned them on to some great experiences and great, sounds, then that's the best thing ever.
That's awesome. And well, and it's what you're talking about too. I mean, I actually touched on this a little bit. I started a segment on this podcast, mostly because I didn't have many guests, where I started kind of a discussion topic every week. And one of the ones I did was, what does avant-garde mean to you? And the whole and you laughed because I laughed too, because to me, I kind of felt that it was more of a general discussion of these kind of genre, the kind of box people in. But to me, it's like, I was more making the point that I think people use the term avant-garde to say something is pretentious, and I don't even think they really know what it means. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
And what you're saying about progressive, oh, it's, nothing boggles my mind more than when I go to try to promote my band on like prog metal kind of things, or prog rock kind of things, and I see these bands that are like the new prog heroes, and they're pretty much just recycling what was done, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, let's sound like Marillion. It's like, well, at the time, Marillion was brilliant because, they were in response to something else and blah, blah, blah. But by kind of copying them, are you really moving something forward? Or are you basically saying to these prog fans, well, here, we're just going to give you more of what you like so that you'll buy our stuff?
Absolutely. And that's the difference between sort of a style, like the big P progressive rock. You'll see that I kind of make that distinction in the book, between a capital P prog and lowercase p prog. The big P being a style. It's like a sound, and it's like, you know what you're going to get, but it's not truly lowercase progressive by dictionary definitions. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's exactly. I think that's kind of the same thing you're talking about, and I think that I think we have to be honest with ourselves whenever we're labeling music, because I think it's a real tricky thing to label music. Ironically enough, as much writing as I've done on music, I don't really like to box music in too much. I think it does a disservice to what music is in essence. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Like, if a band sounds like Marillion and you think they're really good and their songwriting is great and the performance is excellent, well, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But we have to be honest in like, how high up the progressive pedestal we're going to put them. Come on. This has been done, and there's a lot of progressive bands like the ones you're shopping your band around on these sites, and there's a lot of bands on those sites that are hailed, and there's not a single ingredient that's really inventive or new about it. So I guess my mission with Mean Deviation was just to try to get people to be a little more honest about definitions.
Well, that's cool. I mean, that's brilliant. I agree completely with that. And so hopefully anybody who's listening to this will go out and buy it now too. So
yes, I'm money hungry.
Yeah.
As you know, you make tons of money in this niche field of progressive metal.
Let me show you my most recent ASCAP statement for 7 cents. I think you'll.
And see, I know. It's funny because I got accused of with the Peter Steele book of trying to make a quick buck. And while that will and is selling better than Mean Deviation ever did, simply because it's a different subject, and it's certainly a bigger band, I guess, that it's focused on, or a bigger personality. There's still not a ton of money in it, and people need to understand that like this is just still niche stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into the Peter Steele book because I read it this week and I blew through it in 3 days. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I mean, it was so engaging. I was never the hugest Typo Negative fan. I mean, I liked them enough, but I never really was a super huge guy, and I had never really heard Carnivore either. And reading this book, but Peter Steele was this kind of there's this presence to him that like permeated everything in those back then.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well,
yeah. And so yeah, I guess this is a long way of saying so obviously you were a big Carnivore fan, Typo fan. So when did you decide to do the biography?
December 2012. I remember that because I was just answering an interview earlier about it. That the same question was asked. It's I remember it was December 2012. I was I guess I can tell you, I haven't really named this person, but I was talking to people who were close to John Notbite of Dissection. And there was some interest in having a book written about him. And I certainly don't want to make it seem like I'm the guy that writes about fallen metal guys, dead metal guys.
Yeah.
I'm not, but see, and I'm not writing that book anymore. I thought it'd be interesting. I thought it'd be very niche, but I thought there was a good story there. There's definitely a compelling story with that guy. And I was talking to somebody who had total access to a lot of that story. So anyway, as I'm doing that and just thinking about it, really, I was sitting around with my girlfriend, and we were at her kitchen table, and I said, "Well, I'm stuck on what this aspect of this book I'm thinking about writing. Like, I don't know what to do." Like, and I asked her advice, and she said, "Well, let's say you were writing a book about I don't know, Peter Steele, somebody else who had passed and left a legacy." And I said, and the light bulb just went on, and I just shoved that Dissection book aside. I'm like, I'm doing the Peter Steele book because I'm a huge fan, and I was like, it seems weird now to me that there's not a Peter Steele book out there. This is 2.5 years after his death, and I just thought maybe it's too soon for some people, but I want to see this book happen as a fan, and I want to see it done right because there's a lot of sensationalistic aspects of his story that could be treated really poorly and make him out to be something other than what I believe him to be. So I just set in. I just pushed that other book aside. I'm like, I'm doing this book, and it consumed my life up to this moment. So,
well, and did you have like a publishing house at first, or was it just you just did it on your own as a project?
I did it on my own, and I figured the chips would fall into place, and they definitely did. And I chose to go with a very small publishing company that was just starting and was run by somebody I know here in Greensboro. And they have done absolutely everything they said they were going to do. And I think they've even done some things that a larger publisher just would refuse to do. They also kept me engaged and interested in doing this book, because there were moments during the process that I was just about to give up. There were some people that made it extremely hard for me. And not to get too dramatic, but it very much caused me some mental and physical pains and concerns. I don't really want to get into that, but it was,
Of course.
it was extremely stressful in certain ways. But I pushed through, and they really supported me a lot. So yeah, I just kind of started it and just went with the story. And the more people I spoke to who knew Peter, the more the story sort of blossomed. And I think the book could probably be double its size, but there were certain factors kind of conspiring that made me feel like I needed to put it out when I put it out. But it's a fascinating story, and I think I got all the main sort of points in the book. I was able to cram a lot into 308 pages.
Yeah. Well, and I think, one thing that I got from it is, I mean, because I hadn't really read anything about it in terms of, I didn't read, about, some of the more, not to get into this too much, but I know there's been some backlash from the Peter Steele estate and everything like that from what I read on the, because the internet's always true, right? But
I would be happy to address that.
okay.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable at all,
Okay.
but yeah, like, but what I felt reading it, just, because I'm a very, when I listen to music, I listen to music on a very emotional, on a very emotional level. I'm not so much the intellectual guy, I'm more the emotional guy. And this book really, from an emotional perspective, really engaged me with Peter Steele, and I found myself relating to him, and I felt like you did a good job of taking all the different things about him and saying that, yeah, at heart he is this kind of guy, and yeah, these things have happened to him, and he did this here and he did this here, but it doesn't take away from who he was at the core, and and you try to kind of explore, like, okay, well, yeah, he was in, he was in prison, or he was in jail for this, but it was because, you tried to treat the demons in his life as much as you tried to glorify what was really beautiful about him, which was his, yearning for music and, what he was trying to do. Um, so I appreciated that. I thought, to me, I thought you did an amazing job of making him a very sympathetic, because, yeah, like I said, like, I think you even addressed this. I mean, he's very intimidating. He's an intimidating figure, but you kind of brought him more down to earth.
Well, he didn't. I don't. Here's the thing with Peter Steele. I don't. Other than obviously you look at early Carnivore, and they're trying to be intimidating, and they're trying to be this huge kind of presence and sort of fictional, band of thermonuclear warriors and all this. But really, other than say, in the theater of Carnivore and Typo Negative, I don't think as a human being he ever tried to be imposing or dominating. That was just how tall he was.
Yep.
It was just his sort of attitude. It was his seriousness underneath which was this just giving, generous guy who only wanted peace and only wanted, he was a very loving guy, but you read the book. So, and I thank you for your reaction on that, because I think you got the deeper aspect of what I was going for. I think there were a lot of people who said, well, you should just talk about the music because Peter was a private guy. And I had two responses to that. One is that his music is his private life and his private being coming out in public. I mean, you read his lyrics and they're very open, and so I don't buy that he was a private person. He wouldn't have written numerous of those lyrics on the second Carnivore album, particularly like Inner Conflict and Angry Neurotic Catholics. And then like tons of the Type O stuff was basically him journaling in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that his music and his life and his attitude and his death wish and his depression and his love of nature and his passion for women and all this stuff, I think it's all, it's so intertwined with his music and vice versa. So there really is no separation. That's why I went with the generic subtitle, "The Life and Music of," because it's all intertwined. Music
Nope.
was, but music was total therapy,
Yeah.
for him. Also, it's totally bogus to say that he was a private guy when he bared all in Playgirl magazine.
Yeah.
I mean, how private is that?
Yeah.
So, whatever. Everybody's got their opinions. So.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, when you were doing the research for the book, I mean, was it just combing through articles and I mean, like you said, like interviewing people? I mean, how easy was it to gain? And again, I don't want to get into anything that caused you any mental or physical issues, but how much of a process was it to try and arrange interviews with these different people to give you access into kind of his private life?
Yeah, I mean, that was all fairly easy. There were people that I talked to that now have read the book and are just really, really grateful. I've gotten so many great responses from people I spoke to who were close to Peter, who, despite the fact of them speaking to me, were really cautious and really concerned about how I was going to portray Peter and if I was going to get it right, in their eyes. And it turns out that I have, and I'm really proud of that. But so, yeah, it was basically, it started with the people I knew, like Monty Connor, and then he led me to the surviving sisters, Peter's 4 surviving sisters, who I got in with them, and they were very gracious, very giving, very open about things. I interviewed them all at Sister Kathy's house in New Jersey. At the same time, I interviewed some people he was close to in Brooklyn in person. Talked to Monty Connor at that time in New York. So I made trips to New York. I visited the Tree in Prospect Park. I visited his house. I did what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I went pretty deep and got as close as I could. Within that time, and that was early 2013, his sisters and other people as well led me to people that were close to Peter. And I gathered probably about 60 interviews with people by the end of it. And it was a long process. And, I had to hire somebody to transcribe the tapes, and it was incredible. Well, not tapes, but, the recordings.
Right.
And so there was that going on. There was also a lot, as you asked, a lot of research of past media. And especially since the typo guys kind of declined to talk to me. And again, I want to make clear that wasn't really personal about me. It just had to do with some other factors and factions involved with the book. But since they weren't going to talk, I was like, well, that's okay, because they gave a ton of interviews throughout the years, and I can draw from those. I can cite those. That's all very legal and doable. It's done in every biography. And I'll get by that. I'll get around that, and I'll go through it. It's fine. And I was able to talk to so many other people that I was able to get a very well-rounded picture of Peter by the end of it. So yeah, it was intense, and I was working a day job at the time too, with Century Media. So, it was a lot of lost weekends, because that was when I primarily did most of my writing, and then I did research and interviews whenever I possibly could throughout the week. So,
Wow. And
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Oh, no. Yeah, definitely. I mean, because I was just kind of curious how you, because that's the thing. Like, I mean, the one thing I got from it was, you tried to bring in aspects from different people. It's like, you've got, the neighbor down the street talking about him. You have, his sisters, ex-girlfriends, and I think it's important to try to paint a picture of him because yeah, if you just talk to him, because I think you even say, like, his relationship with the press was, like, not always giving different answers to the same questions all the time too.
That was cue I think he took from his heroes, the Beatles. They were notorious for kind of giving nonsense answers and just kind of just having fun with it, and he did the same thing. He also did this thing where he would say something that he wanted to be reported verbatim, just as he had told it. But what would happen is like some irresponsible journalist would twist that around and kind of print the opposite of what he meant. So he said, well, look, if I tell them the opposite of what I want them to know, then the truth will come out on their side. Just kind of playing with them. And he was always the best devil's advocate anyway. I mean, he was the ultimate devil's advocate in this music world, I think. And so he would play around a lot. But I got off the subject, but
no, that's fine. That's fine. This podcast is all about going off the subject.
Great,
because
it's the subject with Greg.
I don't know if you can tell, I'm not a professional music interviewer, by the
way. No, you're totally good. I appreciate your response to the book. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. But you were saying, all the different people that were heard from, also a lot of the record label people that were close to him.
Yep.
Here's the thing, like, the family never tried to be the authority on Typo on the road because they just really weren't there, and so that's when I went to Roadrunner, and Roadrunner never tried to be the authority on his childhood because they weren't there then. So you have to go to the right people for the right period of time. And then there are people throughout the book, like Mark Martin, very close friend of Peter's throughout his life, came in and out of his life, saw him on, from early days until the very end. And people like that were very important as well. And I just tried to, and the other thing people need to understand about this book, there's been a little bit of hubbub, and I think some of it's been misconstrued or misinterpreted. But, I do write with some narrative in the book. I thread the narrative through, I direct it. But, as you've read it, there are a lot of direct quotes from people. It's not quite an oral history, but it could have been. Mm-hmm. That's how I tried to present it, was like, well, this person said this and this person said this. And then I kind of make some conclusions, and then I go off and offer more quotes and offer more insight. And they're direct quotes. I'm not taking everybody's opinions and then forming my own opinion. I really tried to keep it, based on eyewitness from all the people that I spoke to and all the research that I did. So, and I think that's just important for people to understand.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, I'm glad to get that out there. I mean, do you think that, one thing I noticed reading it too was, there are some places where you might, you might like and I won't say interpret or give an opinion, but you'll say, okay, this, here's this situation. Could it be that this was Peter's mindset at this time or something like that? It's kind of like more of a getting you kind of thinking kind of passage, as opposed to this is definitely what Peter was getting into. And,
absolutely. I never tried to talk for him. Exactly.
And do you think that some people misconstrued that as you trying to talk for him, and maybe that's where some of the...
Absolutely. But what happens is those people who, I concede are very passionate about Peter and probably love him in their own way. But I think that a lot of people who said, I'm trying to talk for him or speak for him, or, they insinuate that that's what I'm trying to do. Well, I think they want to do that also. Yeah. But, I invite them to write a book, and good luck, because it ain't easy. About this subject, it's definitely not easy. You're going to come up against a lot of roadblocks. But, I'd be the first person in line to buy the next Peter Steele book, because there are different ways you can interpret truths or received truths. And I did my very, very best to do it honorably. And I got to tell you, there was one person who came up near the end of the process who was one of these people who said, Peter would not want this book written, and forgetting the fact that he had actually and I mentioned this in the intro, that Peter would actually drop hints about book titles that he'd like to write about himself. So that's not totally true. But this person got very possessive and said, you're never going to get it right. You're never going to do justice to him. And there's, blah, 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 blah. And it was really a lot of like verbal diarrhea coming from this person on the phone who got a hold of me. And I listened, and I said, I'm going to start recording now. And is that okay? Yeah. So this person went and talked for about 90 minutes. And it was, it was a very emotional interview. But I got some things out of it, and I understood that this person knew Peter very, very well. Well, the book has come out. This person bought a copy of the book immediately and read it and I expected her to be the first major critic of it, just because she seemed to have a total bias against it from day one. And this person wrote me the nicest reply, saying, "Wow, you really did it. You did it with dignity. It's balanced. I really appreciate what you've done." And I thought, well, there you go. That's all the vindication I need.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
the person was not happy with the fact that this book was going to exist. So I really appreciated that.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, I'm that has to, get put a good weight off your shoulders. That it's like, well, yeah, a bunch of people might say this book is bullshit, but if somebody who is, who was very passionate about Peter comes to you and says, "Oh, well, you actually did a great job."
Yes,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have. I mean, a number of the record company people have, and a number of other people I interviewed who have a copy. Either they bought it or I sent them a copy. I haven't heard from one single person that said that's just total bullshit, man.
Yeah.
They got it wrong. And I'm open to that. If somebody wants to come forward, and they've read the entire thing and they're in a place of authority in this subject, then I would be happy to make an amendment in a future edition, in a
Yeah.
future thing.
Totally.
So I'm open to that. And the only thing I really want to say, and I kind of want to get off the subject of who said what, because I'm just
Oh yeah. No, that's fine.
that's
Yeah.
fine. No, you're bringing up is fine. I'm just a little bit fatigued by it because
Oh
it's
yeah.
since day one that I've dealt with, and I'd rather talk about his music, and I'd rather talk about him
Sure. Yeah.
as
No.
a
No. No. Believe me. No.
one thing
Seriously.
but one thing I will say is that a lot of the hubbub about he said, she said, lies, other bullshit that I've been accused of. For one, I don't think these people have either read the book, and two, there are certain factions within this story or certain people who don't like the fact that other people are in the story. There's a lot of kind of like jealousies or rivalries or things that have happened between people that I can't help, and I'm sorry that it's even happened, and I'm sorry that in the fallout of his death that some people don't get along with other people, but they don't like that some people are included in this book. I just tried to include people in the book if it's legitimate and if the story took me there.
Right.
And I investigated this person, and I said, well, no, they don't need to be in there. There were plenty of people that approached me that I talked to that I just didn't put in because it didn't help the story, or maybe they weren't legit, or maybe they told me nothing new. But everybody that's quoted and involved in this story between these covers of my book, I very much stand behind, and I think they need to be there. And that's been some of the fallout, because there's a lot of people that just, not a lot. It's a very small group of people that don't want this person X in this.
Yeah.
Sorry, too bad. Write your book and write it out of the book. That's your prerogative. You can do that. I did it. Anybody else can do it.
Well, and I think people, like you said, getting off that subject, because I didn't want to make this all about that, because the aside from shedding light on who Peter Steele was, the other aspect of the book which I gravitated to was that you go through pretty much every single release that he did, and it's almost kind of like a review of each album, and I think what you do is you try to contextualize the album in the scheme of what's going on in his life at this time. But
that's a great observation. I'm glad you pick up on that and appreciate that part, because that's important to me.
Yeah, and it's the fact that you go into such detail with how they record, where they record. I mean, I didn't, and this is amazing to me. And I remember I actually sent a text message to Toby from KO. I was like, "Hey, I'm reading Jeff's book. Did you know Typo didn't use live drums on October Rust through?" And he's like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah."
A lot of people didn't know that, And in fact, I suspected it a long time ago. But if you listen to like World Coming Down, like the drum programming is excellent. So much so that you don't assume it's artificial. And plus, I think the Typo sound world, the sort of image, sort of sound image they come up with, that whole thing where the bass blurs into the guitar and vice versa, and their peculiar, use of effects and of course the keyboard aspect. Like, they have such a unique sound that, drum programming, if it's done well, it's just going to slot right in there and be part of that sound that they have without being, oh, this is a rock band with, artificial drums. It doesn't come across like that at all, which is to their credit and really to Johnny Kelly's credit, because Peter did that out of just being a complete and utter, not control freak, but he wanted everything done right. I mean, very anal retentive in the best way, in the best creative way. Like, he had this vision, he was going to see it through. Well, with this new drummer coming in, he was like, I can just make it the way I need to make it. I think Johnny would have been good enough. I actually have some demos of a couple of those albums that aren't out there in the public. Somebody gave me some recordings, not the master recordings, of course. But I've been able to hear some things with Johnny on it, and I'm like, I wish he would have used Johnny on drums. He's a great drummer, and unfortunately he wasn't used, but the programming was done with Josh and Johnny sort of there every step of the way, helping make that happen. So there was some input there, but.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got that too. It seemed like, Johnny he may not be playing, but he's still kind of involved in creating the drum part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody knows he finally got to play on Dead again, and
right.
very solid on that as well. But yeah, there's a lot of music talk and music critique and just kind of having fun with it because, as you say, it sort of intersects with his life and vice versa. So I thought it was interesting to sort of get into him as a human being and, all his, failings and his problems and his worries and concerns and even his triumphs and all the good stuff that happened with him, and kind of look at it, well, let's look at his music now and see how that reflects. And it got pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I think, well, the other thing I got out of it too is you almost make a case for every single, you know how like some people say, well, I like this type of negative album, but this album they kind of missed the mark or whatever. And I think you were kind of brutally honest with, this is where maybe they didn't do as well as they could do on this album, but I think you do a good job of saying, well, everything he's ever done has this magic to it, and it's just like, you may not, even this album has, some sort of, magical moment, which is, essential to understanding who Peter Steele was as a composer.
Definitely.
And that comes through as kind of a very loving fan perspective. It's incredible. So I mean I've been listening to nothing but Typo Negative. Well, pretty much nothing but Typo Negative this whole week.
That's great. I want to tell you something. We've talked a little bit about the bickering, and I don't want to address that any longer because I appreciate everybody who has anything to say about this book, whether it's positive or negative.
Right.
But I'll tell you that nobody should be upset about the fact that this book is making people either rediscover his music or discover it entirely. I've had a number of people kind of like you. They were like, well, I just kind of read it either because I like your writing or I'm a Carnivore fan. I never got into Typo. And I've had a number of people like really, get into his music because of this book. And, that's what it's all about. And I'm so glad about that. And certainly nobody that knows or loves Peter can argue that. That this book is probably helping him sell some records to some new people or resell that people that may have gotten off the boat at some point. And all the attention on Peter, it's the most publicity he's had for quite a while. And, I'm really grateful that that's been happening with this thing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's from listening to Typo to the Carnivore. Like I said, I had never heard Carnivore really, and even that was just I couldn't believe I missed out on some of this stuff, So
yeah.
I was kind of like, what an asshole I was.
Even for me, where this music's been around, in my sort of music library since it's all come out, I now kind of get to hear it in a new way and understand it in a little bit of a deeper way and have a different connection to it. So it's been cool for me too, just as a fan, to kind of, reappreciate, I guess, everything that he did, and the very unique thing he did. I mean, there's just, there's never been a musical artist like Peter Steele. It's very, very individualistic stuff.
Yeah. Well, the one other thing I was kind of curious about, as kind of a gear nerd, which I am, you talk a lot about how in the studio the fur.
Not Mark. No, I'm blanking. Mike Marciano from
Yeah.
Systems 2 studio. I wanted to talk to him because he was there for every note that they laid down. And as you know, that fur, that sound, you know what that is. When Mike Marciano talks about it in the book, and he reveals that they used to call that sound the fur. Let's put the fur on. Anybody that listens to Typo Negative, and you're a gearhead, and you're into sound and textures and stuff, like you know what he's talking about. So it was kind of cool to get in a little more into the studio process there.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I was I was interested in that because again, I hadn't paid enough close attention to their music, but was it a delay effect, or is it just, was it the, I forget, did he say what specifically, what box?
He really didn't give specifics, and I tried to get him to, but part of him was like, he didn't remember a lot of details that I wished he would have remembered, but then who does? I mean, he's recorded a lot of different kinds of things over a lot of years, but he certainly was able to offer enough recollection about the basic idea in the studio, and how how focused Peter was, and how well he worked with Josh, and how Josh was maybe the only person who might be able to criticize Peter and have Peter not take it poorly, because Peter had such a vision that, and anybody who's got that vision, they're pretty unwavering in that. So it's hard to give them constructive criticism. That's not a reflection on them as a person. It's just, that's the vision, man. If it's that strong, you got to be a pretty special person to be able to maybe dent that vision a little bit to make it better.
Yeah. Cool. And so I guess the next logical thing would be, are you going to be writing any more books soon, or are you just kind of?
No. I enjoyed, despite some of the roadblocks and stuff, I really enjoyed doing this, and I enjoy the process of writing a book. And in fact, after Mean Deviation came out, I was like, I'm going to take a break. It's exhausting. And then like 6 months later, I'm like itching to do a book,
Yeah.
And I know I'll probably do a third book. I think it'll be something vastly different than either of the first two, though.
Something lighter.
No, I don't know. I take music pretty seriously, and of course, I have a great sense of humor about everything. But I don't know. I don't know if it'll be lighter or not. I think it'll be a little more. I don't know, maybe a little more interpretational or philosophical. I don't think it's going to be a history necessarily, or a biography. Although I did enjoy the biography process a lot. I'd like to do more of those. So who the hell knows? I like I told you, I work on the weekends mostly with the writing, because I have day jobs right now. I work for Inside Out Music, the label, and I'm really involved in that. I love doing it, but I'm exhausted at the end of the day. I don't have the power in me to write a book at the end of the day. So it's a lot of weekends, and it's a lot of lost weekends. So right now I'm just kind of enjoying my weekends.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I know that.
It's ironic as hell, probably, but for all the writing I've done for 20 plus years, I'm kind of pulling back on that altogether for now. And I am probably listening more than ever without writing about it or even sharing it with anybody. Like, I'm really like delving into my music library in a way I haven't before. A lot of that's just being a hi-fi guy and into like, different stereo gear. And with every upgrade, things sound even better, and you get deeper into the experience. And I'm kind of like enjoying sort of I don't know, I'm enjoying listening more than ever, which is
awesome
because I'm around it all the time. But I try not to burn out as well. But yeah, I'm more interested in listening than writing.
Oh, okay.
Right.
And speaking of listening, because I mean, you've had this kind of pleasure of being around, like you said, you worked for Century Media, and now you're working for Inside Out, and what kind of up and coming bands, like what's kind of getting your what's kind of what kind of newer bands are getting your attention lately?
Well, it varies. I mean, I'd say lately I've probably been delving into older stuff like early 80s, sort of new wave or synth pop or whatever you call it. And I don't know, I don't I don't necessarily there's not a ton of new stuff that I think is just really amazing that nobody would know about anyway. I mean, the first band I think about, they're not necessarily new, and they also are on the label I work for. But Leprous is to me one of the best new modern bands out there, and I think that's a band who have their own stamp of individuality on their music. I think they're brilliant in terms of writing and performance, and live they're amazing. So Leprous is a really interesting and exciting new band. I think that I don't know. I always stumble on these questions because I'm not. I don't feel like I'm hearing brand new bands that are coming right out of the gate that are amazing. I think they take a while to develop before I get interested. But yeah, there are definitely some newer things that I like a lot. I mean, they're in a completely different realm than what we've been talking about so far. But Horrendous, the death metal band, I think are fantastic, and Tribulation from Sweden are really great. Morbus Kron from Sweden are really great. So there's some interesting stuff happening with kind of this new wave of death metal right now. All those bands I mentioned, I think, are sort of putting their own twist on it. They're definitely not carbon copies of anything.
Okay, and I guess maybe a different way of phrasing the question would be, okay, well, in listening to your collection, what is something, like something older that you've just newly discovered or are hearing differently for the first time that, because I find, that happens to me all the time.
Sure. I mean, I've been getting into I've been going deeper with Duran Duran. Like I've always been a fan of the Rio album, and their first album I think is brilliant. But I've gone deeper. I'm like checking out the whole catalog now. I have almost all those now, and I'm finding that I really like what they do. I'm finding that they're kind of masters of their craft.
Oh yeah.
and I didn't know that. I guess I just kind of dropped off after Rio and just didn't realize how much great stuff is out there. One of which is Arcadia, the band by John Taylor, Simon Le Bon, and I think it's Roger. They kind of split off, and the other guys did Power Station, and these guys did that Arcadia album. That's a brilliant piece of work. I love that album, and so I'm kind of delving in that whole realm. I just bought my first Flock of Seagulls album, and I love it. And I actually emailed Russ Givens, aka Proscriptor from Absu, because I knew he was into that stuff, and I've been friends off and on with him over the years from afar. But I said, dude, I'm getting into this stuff. What would you recommend? And he sent me this list of all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm kind of delving into that now. And, some of it I like, some of it I don't. But so I'm kind of discovering that world right now.
That's awesome.
That's been really interesting for me. I have been listening to a lot of death metal from various eras, rediscovering things or discovering things. I'm always listening to progressive rock of various styles and offshoots and geographies. Italy, Argentina, Sweden, of course England. And also I've been rediscovering the Beatles in a huge way. I realized there were some Lennon McCartney compositions I hadn't ever heard before. And I think that's kind of weird to go through life and realize you haven't heard all the Beatles songs.
Yeah.
So I've been delving into that, and that's been just wonderful. I'm also reading his 800-page biography called John Lennon, The Life, which is utterly fantastic. And makes me want to be able to rewrite Soul on Fire, quite honestly. I want to double the length and go even deeper like this guy did. It's really great. So that's kind of like a companion to sort of rediscovering the Beatles in a really big way, and realize that they're not overrated at all. I mean, they really they really changed the game in so many great ways.
Yeah.
And just from a pure songwriting standpoint, I understand why they're so heralded. They've always been in my life, but it's a big renaissance for me right now. It's like I want to get my first Beatles T-shirt now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, one, and I don't want to keep you too long, but the one last question, because this is something that I had thought about, and especially rediscover, listening to Carnivore and everything. I was kind of curious what your thought was on how metal is recorded, because to me, like, I have this kind of, even, I don't know, I have this fondness for the 80s production style of metal, even though it was dirty and it wasn't always perfect. Like, but, I guess I yearn for that as opposed to kind of the mechanized, um, kind of way that metal is done these days.
Well, yeah, and I hear you, and I sympathize with you, and I'm with you all the way. And I'm kind of glad that I right now work for a label where these artists are recording properly and kind of have that old aesthetic, even if it is modern. But this thing about brick walling and the loudness wars and the compression and all this stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I hate it. I absolutely hate it. It saps all the beautiful nuances and dynamics of music. And metal, as we know, has plenty of that. It's not just this.
Yeah.
Even if it's a band that sounds like, there are dynamics. You listen to like an old Suffocation record, and while they just sound like this fucking molten mercury, suffocating you, it's crazy, and it you wouldn't think of them as being a most dynamic band, but the way they recorded back then brings out the sort of earthiness of the guys playing the instruments. Now it just sounds like I don't know. It just sounds like it's all written and performed on a computer. Really,
well,
it's soulless, I guess.
And without naming names, without going into specific details, but
come on, name names. Come on.
But I was privy to hearing about the recording methods of learning about the recording method of a certain band, and it was interesting when they said it was that the producer or the engineer guy, his whole rationale is that the musicians should play on a record as little as possible.
Oh God.
And the idea was, okay, well, we get one perfect verse riff, and then we cut and paste, and same with choruses and like and and then they were saying that, oh yeah, and when they do the rhythm guitars, they do like four beats, and then they stop, retune the guitar, go and do the next four beats, and it's like this kind of tedium, and the thing was, then they tried. There was I ran into it where people were trying to do that with my songs,
right?
And I was kind of like, no. I appreciate where it came from a time-saving, money-saving standpoint, but I was just kind of like, but I like that when there's like little deviations between verses and choruses. I like playing even if it's the same chords.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you, and I agree with you. I'm there's one thing to overdub or do what they used to call punching in, to kind of fix things. And I like studio albums. I like studio albums more than I like live performance sometimes, I think. And I like the art and craft of an album, but I think, the example you're talking about, it's just going way too far into ripping the very soul out of it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The humanity out of it. And I want that humanity. I want that sort of like vulnerability. I think that's it's a really important part of music.
Yeah. But the other thing about it too that I like is that as a music fan, like even with albums I've listened to gazillions of times, I always find it interesting to fine tune my ear to where I can hear like little subtle differences.
Sure.
And I know a funny one, and if you listen to the studio version of Line of Fire by Journey.
Don't laugh. I'm a Journey fan.
Okay. Well, I never know. I never know. I'm a Journey fan too. So don't.
Yeah, no. Line of Fire is a great song too.
But I was saying, like, if you listen to the studio version, it always, I get a kick out of listening to the vocal delivery of the first chorus as opposed to the second chorus.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm gonna come off like a big nerd here, but it's just like funny hearing like, there's one chorus where Steve Perry's really trying to hit, the beat really, and then like, it's not as fluid, and then the second, but they kept it in anyway, and
Yeah, well, exactly. Right, and I think that's being lost these days when it's easier to replicate and perfect. I really lament that. It makes me glad I'm work with bands like Beardfish and some of these others that sort of, they're doing new things with kind of the old prog rock sort of style, but they also value real recording.
Yeah.
Which is not to say they're recording on real tapes. I just mean that what you're talking about, that's that human element that's being lost. I'm really glad that luckily a lot of the bands I listen to or work with are kind of fighting against that or just not even thinking about it. I guess I haven't heard the new Blind Guardian album, for instance, but I'm pretty sure that thing's probably brick walled to shit. And I just don't. And if I'm speaking out of turn and I'm being ignorant and it's not, then okay. But a lot of those kinds of bands, whether they're speed metal or death metal or whatever it is, I just don't think those records sound very good. Behemoth, I just think there's just writing wise, performance wise, it might be amazing, but I just think the way that they're recording is unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you.
One thing I'd like to talk about too is, and now I'm keeping you. I feel like.
Oh no.
If you think about all the classic albums, like Master of Puppets it's a great recording, but it's in some ways it sounds a little quaint or flawed because it's just it's of its time. But I think that's great. I think that personality and production lends a lot to the music itself, and I think when we think of certain old classics, we think as much about how it sounds and like what the production style is as much as we do the songs and performances itself, and I don't think you get that with modern albums.
You don't. I mean,
it's
no,
so easy to get a perfect, quote unquote, perfect recording nowadays, and I think it's a little, it's changing the game a little bit.
Well,
not for the better.
Well, it just makes me think. I remember reading a quote. I think I forget if it was from Alex Skolnick or Eric P. One of the guys from Testament, where they said, I think it was around the release of Formation of Damnation, where they were just kind of like, well, it's amazing, like, that we're finally able to get the record we've always wanted to, the way it's always wanted to sound.
Right.
And it's like, metal production has finally gotten to the point where we're able to do this. And I was just kind of like, yeah and no. It's like,
see, New Order still sounds better than Formation of Damnation.
Yeah. And
to my grave. And you're right. Now we can be perfect. Now we can have the perfect recording that sounds like all the other bands coming out on all the other labels,
Yeah, exactly. And it's and you bring up a good point with Master of Puppets. I mean, I even go so far as I think I used to prefer Ride the Lightning, and not even because, I thought the songwriting was better on Master of Puppets, but the vibe of Ride the Lightning just always kind of resonated with me more than Puppets.
It's thicker, it's heavier.
Yeah.
I prefer the production of Ride the Lightning. Absolutely. I mean, I love both albums, but Ride the Lightning to me, well, that's like a top 5 metal album for me. So
yeah, same here.
Here again, also listen to Rush's Moving Pictures. I don't think we've heard a better production since. So that's 1981. Like what, that's my opinion, and that's just pure objective, opinion. But I think that's a perfect recording, and I think that's the standard, really.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Rush. That's a whole other podcast.
Sure. Yes, it is, my friend.
Yeah, that's. Yeah. I can obsess over every little thing that Alex Lifeson has influenced my guitar playing with.
Nice.
And
what do you think of some of his? Have you delved into some of his playing, like particularly the leads, like on like? I know this is going to sound crazy, but like Hold Your Fire and that whole era. Because he was really interesting at that time. I think he was challenged by the amount of keyboards in their music.
Yes, I'm a big fan of this. Here we go. This is a big.
Here,
Well,
floodgates are open.
yeah.
That's number two.
Well, the thing about Alex Lifeson, the thing about his playing that always impressed me was being that he was in a quote unquote prog band, which is funny because I think a lot of the prog guys kind of dismiss Rush, but um, he was never the most technical guitar player, and his guitar solos were more about creating a texture, a vibe, um,
Absolutely.
and the thing about his '80s work is that is I think, and you can hear it a little bit on some of the earlier stuff, especially Limelight. But his use of the whammy bar is something that is a work of genius to me,
Yeah,
and
not talked about that much.
it's not. It really isn't, and and I think he has this kind of subtle way of using it where it's not like, the Pantera, the kind of wow, the dive bomby stuff, which I love too, but he uses it kind of as, for what it's meant to do, the vibrato. It's only supposed to be as kind of subtle
Yeah.
effect with like, the occasional dive bomb and what have you, um but no, his '80s stuff, between the vibrato, his use of the chorus and the delay, he really was trying to create a different guitar sound, and I think I think a lot of it was the era, because I mean I think a lot of the stuff he was doing, like a lot of the effects he was using, was very, there's a lot of bands from that era doing that kind of chorusy, delayed kind of clean guitar sound,
Yeah.
the Police, I mean, another big, but I do think he has his own vibe to it, his own, and it carries on. I mean, I could talk for hours about how, because I used to love listening to the Presto album, and like, hearing like these little like subtle things he did with the guitar, with like these little like ghost flourishes and things like that. Yeah.
That's why I brought it up, because he's really not talked about as much for that era as I think the '70s era.
No.
And I think he did some of the most inventive guitar work in the '80s. And it doesn't even matter if you like that era of Rush very much. I mean, it took me a while with that era. I had to, be ready for it, I think, later in life, and now I am. And I'm realizing, like, wow, he was just as good on those '80s albums, and also very, very different.
Oh yeah.
But also still Alex Lifeson, really, really creative.
Yeah.
And what a band!
Yeah. He's no, he
It's
is.
just stupid how talented that band is. I know that's not the first time that's been said.
Yeah,
It's
no. Yeah, I know, right?
nothing unique to say, but it still blows me away.
Well, and you bring up a good point too. Like, this is actually going to be one of my discussions of the week that I was going to point to people, is this idea of received ideas. Like, and
Right.
what I mean by that is, because I remember when I was getting into music, it was just kind of insinuated that you should like '70s Rush but not '80s Rush.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
And that's without me ever actually listening to any of it. So I would pontificate and be like, "Well, I don't really like '80s Rush," and people would be like, "Well, why?" And I'm like, that's a good reason. I don't know why.
It's just been hammered into my head so many times that it's
Yeah,
not good. It's not
yeah,
for me, you know.
exactly. And one of the greatest examples was, I mean, I bought, because I was a huge Metallica fan, and I bought this book. Um, this kind of biography book from like '92 or whatever, and I'm reading it, and the guy is like, and he talks about how they, on the Garage Days Revisited, they do a tongue-in-cheek version of it, and he goes, Iron Maiden's hokey Run to the Hills. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, Run to the Hills, what a hokey song. And I'm just like, wait a minute, it's one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, I don't know. That whole perception of like '80s metal and hair metal has got to go. I mean, you sometimes see Iron Maiden lumped into a hair metal band, or
Yeah.
some VHS or VH1 classic roundup, and like, I hate all that, because
Yeah.
metal was just as diverse as anything since.
Yeah. There was a
Not
good.
all of them were the same.
Exactly.
And
And
get treated that way, and I think that your example is a great
well,
example of that.
Well, the other band that he kind of makes fun of, and again formed my opinion of this band until I listened to him, was Crimson Glory.
Sure.
He was just kind of like, he's like, oh, Metallica played this gig with these weirdos who just wore masks, and
Say about the music itself.
Right, exactly. And I was just like, oh, Crimson Glory, they must be really dumb. And then
And only released one of the greatest albums of all time in
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
Transcendence. You know.
yeah, and then there's Transcendence, and I'm just like, okay, yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, I think a lot of people still have those kind of mentalities, and it's. I'd like to think that the younger generation is getting able to kind of get, with all the ability, the ease they have to immerse themselves in music, they can form their own opinions. I hope.
I hope so too. And I think when people are spouting out stuff like that, like the guy on Iron Maiden and Crimson Glory, I'm always very suspect of people like that. I'm not at all suspectful of suspectful. Is that even a word? I'm not at all like critical of people offering constructive criticism on music. That's fantastic. But these kind of blanket statements about bands like that that don't tell you anything really. I'm always very skeptical about that. I don't believe in it, and those kind of people seem like they're from the outside and they're just writing about something for a paycheck or something.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about who I'll take advice from when it
Yeah,
comes to music, because I'm just so set in my ways. I know what I like, so
yeah,
I don't
exactly,
know.
exactly. Well, hey man, this has been a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for doing
I
this.
appreciate it. I'd like to talk just off the record someday too.